Hello everyone, welcome back to another edition of the Azim Premji University Let's Talk Climate Change series. I'm Harini Nagendra. I lead the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability at the university, and it's been a pleasure to have a series of wonderful speakers coming and talking to us about climate change and sustainability. Today it's an especial pleasure to have Dr. Rohan Arthur from the Nature Conservation Foundation, who's been doing marine ecology, we discovered today, for not 25 years, but 30 years. Rohan, you and I are older than we think we are.
Yeah, not yet 30, but yeah, close to it.
Close to 30 years. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Rohan.
Thanks a lot. It's good to be here. Yeah.
Let me begin with my first question, which is something I often ask people. Were you always interested in nature as a child? I mean, you grew up in Bombay, so hardly the... there are many people who say that they were taken trekking with their parents in jungles and things like that. So I'm wondering where your interest came from.
I mean, I guess I was always interested in nature in some way. Would it be my primary interest? I wouldn't be able to say that. I think I sort of slipped into it through a series of happy coincidences, you know. But growing up in Bombay, of course, surrounded by a cement jungle. We did have Borivali National Park in our backyard, which is, I think, a fantastic thing about Bombay, that in the middle of this grey metropolis, you have this beautiful little green jewel, right, that you could visit. And we would visit them. And as part of the local nature club, we would go there virtually every weekend. And then I would go off on my own to R.A. Mill Colony and go bird watching.
How old were you then?
This would have been in my early teens.
And who took you bird watching, or who taught you how to identify birds?
So WWF at that time had a network of nature clubs. I don't know if they still exist, but they were in all the schools. And so you could register as part of the nature club. And one of the main activities of the nature club was to take the students off on bird watching trips into the national park. And that for me was really the introduction to wild nature. You know, of course, apart from the books that you would read and all the rest of it. But so I think nature was always a part of my life. I wouldn't say it was, honestly, it wasn't a dominant part of my life. I mean, most of my colleagues around me, I think they were born knowing that this is what they would like to be doing.
Right.
That wasn't my case.
Wasn't mine either. And you said happy coincidences, which is how I think I also slid into ecology. But what were your happy coincidences?
I mean, a series of things. Part of it was, first of all, realizing that I probably wouldn't ever become a singer, a professional singer. That's the first thing. Secondly,
we should tell people that you sing very well.
Well, I used to, okay, at some earlier stage. But I think one of the biggest coincidences was, you know, or happy accidents was really the story that I keep telling my students, and I tell them this story all the time, which is about how I got to study zoology. I was equally interested in zoology as I was in English literature. And I went to St. Xavier's College in Bombay, and I had to make this choice about which stream to choose, right? And I just couldn't for the life of me make up my mind. So I applied to both, hoping that I would be chosen in only one, that the choice would be made for me. But on the day of inscription, I found that I had been accepted in both. So now I was in the horns of a dilemma. I had to make a choice just then and there. And because I didn't have my mother to consult, I did the only possible thing. I stood in the shorter line. And the shorter line happened to be for zoology. In St. Xavier's,
not kidding me.
No. St. Xavier's had a very, very good department of English literature. So everyone wanted to be in the Department of English Literature, and I chose zoology because it was the path less traveled. So I mean, I can glorify it now by saying it was the path less traveled, but actually I think I was just lazy.
And if your mother was there, what would she have made you do?
I'm not sure she would have helped much. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm just thinking my sort of sideways slip into ecology happened because I was in the Indian Institute of Science doing an integrated PhD. And I didn't like the undergrad in microbiology, chemistry, zoology. So I did a master's, the first project in molecular biology, and discovered I hated the lab. And I was planning to quit. And if I hadn't gone for a talk, which I thought Hamilton was going to teach on evolutionary biology, and it turned out they were behind schedule, so Madhav Gadgil was speaking instead, I don't think it would have crossed my mind that I could have done ecology. And so later people were telling me that, I mean, and it's fortune also, right? Good fortune, because there were so many people coming to Madhav's lab all the time who were bird watchers from a young age or were very interested in zoology. And I just knew I didn't like molecular biology. I didn't know what I liked. But I knew I liked the man's talk.
So do you think do you ever regret the paths that you haven't taken?
No.
No.
No. For me, I mean, I think I've been very fortunate. But the paths that I have taken, thank God, have led me exactly where I want to be.
Do you keep in touch with those other streams?
In an odd way. So at the university for a while, when I was in the academic curriculum committees, I could read a curriculum of neurobiology or microbiology or plant biology and figure out if they were on the right track or, and give. So I was the person who could do a few of those things in addition to what I was doing. And that was always fun because I would remember my master's stuff in molecular biology, which I'd read.
I think that's something that's, you often hear students in particular today agonizing about particular streams that they would like to choose, and they really are torn between these, because they think it's such a momentous decision. But what I often feel is that really those big decisions in life, you either don't have much choice over or you don't actually know when you've made them.
Right.
So, but eventually everything, it all adds up to your certain life experience, and you bring back all those skills and learning to whatever you're doing at that particular moment. But it's really difficult to tell people, at that career stage to say, don't worry this much.
I'm thinking of the woman we met. So at Bangalore International Center yesterday, we met this woman who was the owl artist, right? And she said she'd been working she had a professional career in IT, I think she said. And then she quit that to become a painter of owls because people sacrifice owls in North India for Diwali.
Right.
Because it's a vahana of Saraswati, Lakshmi.
That's right, yeah. Right.
So, but so you're right. I mean, if she found her interest later, and she obviously somewhere in her mid-40s pivoted and has been doing these workshops now. And
those pivots are more difficult. I find that being able to suddenly, to make a decision in your life to say, okay, this is not the career for me, and then I'm going to pivot completely to something else. That I'm not sure I have the courage for.
I'm not sure I would have the courage either. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But I think you're right in the sense of, I think if you want to do something on sustainability, and that actually brings me to my other question, that I think if you want to do something in the area of ecology, conservation, climate change, sustainability, the so-called dismal disciplines, right? Because they're crisis disciplines. I think you don't just need the science, but somewhere all of these other things that we do, the life experiences, like you were saying, come in useful. So I'm curious because I think anyone who also watches or has listened to any of your other talks will see, like many of the people commented yesterday, that your talks are always very different from other people's talks, right? They have the science, but there's a certain way in which you present. It might be a quote here or the font that you use or a sketch.
So, I don't know. It's difficult for me to reflect on my own manner of presenting because that's a little too meta. So, but what I find it very, very difficult to tell my stories in the way that I'm supposed to.
What do you mean by the way you're supposed to?
Because there seems to be, I think, in the scientific field, the sense that there is a certain formula by which we communicate our message. That there needs to be, there is a structure by which you set up your expectations, have a hypothesis with alternate hypotheses, do your test, and then after that, come to the conclusion, and then you say QED, that's how I came to the conclusion. And that's a really nice formula for the way science is done, right? You move from uncertainty to certainty, right? And I find that yes, that's useful, but it's profoundly boring in the way you communicate. That's not the way we communicate. That's not the way when we have a conversation, it's much more free-flowing. Okay, if there is an arc of the conversation, it is an arc that is much less formulaic than that, right? But over that, in the process of that conversation, there is a dialogue. And I think, all creativity is born in dialogue. That's what I'd like to do even when having a talk, when giving a talk. I would like as much as possible to make it into a dialogue so that you'd raise certain elements of doubt in the mind of the audience. That audience can come back to you and challenge you on that, and that begins the process of a conversation.
So it's really a dialectic.
It is dialectical, and I think that all, this idea that you have this single genius who sits down under a tree and comes up with, with ideas out of the blue. I have never found that. I have never found that to be true, at least for me. It is always through conversation and through dialogue and potentially even through conflict that ideas are born.
But do you think, and I mean, again, this is probably it is a meta question, but growing up in a house like you have, influenced by music or by art or by, like your father was a very creative, advertising and, all the stuff that went on at home, and you had a family band. So all of these art inspirations around you, music, etc., do you think that influences the way in which you choose to communicate or the way in which you yourself think about your work? Or is it the fact that you work on coral reefs and lagoons, which are anyway so visual?
So one of the things that I keep thinking, it's one of the things that I think I have to always overcome is that I'm a really messy thinker. I'm extremely messy, okay, and so I don't think of myself as, having my ideas very sharply defined. And so my sense is that when I try to communicate, I try to make a virtue of that messiness. And I suspect that part of the experiences I've had growing up, in my entire family, or from my father's side or from my mother's side, I'm the first person to have done science for the last 3 generations at least. And so what I was surrounded by was a family of storytellers. And I think that's something that I've learned. I think that the power of the narrative is extremely important. And then when you start to try to understand what that narrative is, and if you try to unpack narrative structures, that's when you realize that there's such a lot of creative possibilities in the way you can communicate messages. It's not always that you say, once upon a time and they all lived happily ever. That's one way to tell a story. But if you can drop people right in the middle of a story and then radiate out from there, present them with the dilemma right up front, and then try to resolve it in different ways, or start at the end and come back. And I think that those playful ways of telling stories actually keep people engaged.
I'm just thinking, since we're at Forests of Life right now, and this is, of course, the large exhibition that goes on at the university once a year, and we have 15,000 plus students, a lot of science-based exhibits, right, on the forests. But we were also, you and I, just before this, in a Yakshagana performance, and Yakshagana is this traditional art form of Karnataka, where they were enacting a small play, which is a very comical movement when the Mahabharata and the Ramayana both meet.
That's right.
And it's a beautiful performance. But in there, Arjuna and Hanuman are talking. And the troupe so beautifully brought in elements of forests and human conflict. For instance, they were saying things like, so Arjuna tells Hanuman, we're in the modern era today, man has gone to the moon. And you worked so hard to build this bridge. I don't know why you had to use such ancient kind of approaches like trying to build the Setu with stones. And then Hanuman says, that's because we are not like you, human beings. You have a good and a bad, you have too much intellect that makes you have a good and a bad brain, right? But we animals are simple-minded, so we have only a simple brain which does only good things. And that, you could see all the kids then laughing and, shouting and clapping alongside that. And so when they wove in that, or the cheetah that came into Bangalore recently and had to be shot tragically, but they wove in elements of that, you could see the children responding so well to that. And so I was sitting there thinking, maybe we don't need all of course we need the science. I mean, I'm not saying maybe we don't need all of this, but clearly I think it shows us that we need much more than the science, right?
What I do most of my time for my bread and butter is science. And so I think science is necessary. It's absolutely necessary to give us insights into the ecosystems that we are studying. But I think that when we are trying to talk to people about science, we scientists are the worst people when it comes. We just don't know how to communicate at all. The language of science so traps us within this silo of vocabulary, which is basically, in order to have this patina of expertise, we find it difficult to be able to get past that, to be able to communicate in clear and simple terms and engaging terms to people.
And do you think it also makes us arrogant?
Oh, I think it makes
Is
us
it something-
extremely arrogant. We take the agency that we have as scientists, and I think we misuse it completely, and we arrogate to ourselves much more, much more power than we deserve, I think. And we are in the business of science and the business of wisdom, I think, are two separate things altogether. We are just in the business of knowledge. And knowledge to some extent is passé. But the ability to synthesize that knowledge, the ability to make something of it, to make it meaningful to our lives, is really not the business of scientists. And I think that sometimes we take on ourselves that responsibility. We believe that just because we are the creators of knowledge, we can also be the purveyors of wisdom.
So if I look back at my own self, let's say 10 years or 20 years ago, I feel sometimes horrified at the way, I work on X forest, let's say a forest in central India, a forest in Nepal, and said, I've produced this policy-relevant work, but the policymakers are not taking my work into account. And then when I started my urban work, I think it was like a light bulb went off, because what you realize is I started that as a resident of the city and not as someone trying to provide my wisdom or my knowledge to an external policymaker. And sometimes all you needed was something like, let's survey the number of trees that are going to be cut for this metro project. And that's not science, but the fact that an academic university does it gives it some legitimacy. So a community group which wants to protest and say, save some trees has a legitimate scientific authority saying this. So maybe you don't need the very fancy work for everything, the meta-population dynamics, the landscape ecology, the fragmentation work that I did, which is for publishing papers, which adds to knowledge, which is all important. Maybe is not the policy relevant work the policymakers asked. And now if I think back to that standing on high moral ground old self that I had, I'm quite horrified at myself, because I think I never went to the policymakers and asked them, what did you need to better manage your forests?
So I'm always fascinated with first of all, the breadth of the kinds of things you do, and the diversity of, and your ability to do all of them with so much of enthusiasm and optimism. and I'm wondering at what stage you went from studying satellite imagery of forests and things like that to all the work that you've done right now. Was it easy enough to just diversify? Where did you find the major barriers to that?
So I think for me, the good thing was to have made this switch midway. So up to going from molecular biology, microbiology undergrad to molecular biology masters, and then suddenly jumping into ecology for a PhD with no training, no courses, nothing. So sort of taught myself everything from the remote sensing to the coding to the statistics, which means I don't know anything very well, but I can somehow muddle along. And so I could then pick up history or work with Lynn Ostrom and then pick up community and institutions work and things like that. So that fear of not being able to do things is gone. The lack of training is a problem in some ways. So for instance, there's something if I would love to do some really advanced statistical techniques to tease out causality, probability. These are very multivariate problems. What causes what? I don't have the capacity to do that. Or I lack the physics and the maths, because that's something that I had physics and maths phobia early in school.
So to some extent, what you're saying is that, I completely agree with this, that you have escaped the tyranny of expertise.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
because I think expertise is it's something that we get trapped by, but expertise is available. It doesn't make you particularly special, right?
And if
Everyone's
you are
an expert.
willing to collaborate, then I think you can get the expertise from others, right? So that has helped, because I've always had fantastic collaborators who have the expertise that I lack.
But do you think that it takes a particular kind of person to collaborate well in this field?
I think it does. I think, again, coming back to the question about arrogance, to me, it works very well when people are not worried in advance about credit and ownership and are more interested in the science than who's going to produce what and whose name is going to be on what. And so this is something I've seen very early on. Sometimes collaborations, this is my first gut sense. When you start in and you find for weeks you're only talking about the science and not talking about the papers and who's going to write what, you're in good hands. And then there are some collaborations where very early on people start asking, so how many papers are we going to get, who's going to get first authorship? And then I quickly back away because I realize this is going to be a problem, and it's a gut sense thing, and it's worked out.
So now this is probably going to sound like something that comes from some kind of essentialist trope. But do you think that your gender has anything to do with that, your ability to cooperate? I mean, I think it's an essentialist trope, but I want to know what you think.
I don't know. I mean, I've actually landed up working with many more women than I have men. But I see a lot of collaborative men. I mean, you're here, sitting right here. We've been collaborating for a long time. So I would say it's an essentialist trope too. I think it's more, somewhere early experiences scar people. So I think I also probably should take back my statement about only arrogance, which is probably slightly judgmental. The people that I know who have had others steal their ideas or steal data or things like that have naturally build up certain kinds of suspicion. So there's also that.
But I wonder, I mean, we all see the value of this, of cooperation and of dialogue, right? And of breaking the boundaries of expertise, of moving towards something that is truly multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary.
Especially for conservation, which has to have so many pieces coming.
So many pieces coming together. Do you think that the structures of our institutions are designed for that, or is it designed to get people to compete with each other much more, and therefore cooperation becomes much more difficult? Do you think there are ways that we can do this structurally?
I think the structure of our typical academic institutions definitely are designed against this. So for instance, if you have multi-authored papers and you're consistently not first author or last author places, in a traditional academic university, you would not get promoted, right? You and I are both fortunate, I think, to be in places where these standards don't apply. But I don't know if we were in a traditional academic place, would we be able to do what we're doing?
Right.
Probably not. But the other thing is also, for instance, because I work at the intersection between ecology and geography, I found geography to be a much better home for some of these things. Because ecology, there's something about the natural sciences which makes things much more closed. And again, I'm being essentialist. There are lots of, exceptions to this rule. And again, core social sciences, which similarly are very closed door. But geography seems to be a place where the humanities, the social sciences, and the natural sciences come in. And so there's this confluence which seems to work very well. And so my experience is geography departments are much more collaborative. You'll have people doing all kinds of interesting things with anthropology, with ecology, with earth sciences, with humanities.
So as a discipline, it is actually, you think that geography is a place where it gets all these streams together and houses it together in this one place.
There is something about ecology that you have wildlife ecology, then you have the anthropologists who work with indigenous communities, and then you have the foresters and the government authorities. And these are three completely either parallel tracks or tracks that are constantly at loggerheads with each other.
No, that's interesting. It's certainly my experience as well. But yeah, as institutions that are constantly trying to think about how to do the work that we do more reflexively and do it better, building structures for cooperation is perhaps one of the most difficult things that we have. Even within our institution, trying to get people to cooperate intellectually, to be able to share ideas, openly and form meaningful, have meaningful dialogues, is certainly not easy. It's not something that happens, organically.
So, going from there to for instance, the younger people in your team, do you feel this is changing over time? I mean, from the time you and I did our PhDs and got into ecology versus now, do you feel they're inherently more collaborative? My gut sense is so. I'm wondering if yours is the same.
I think there are several, you have students and then you have students, so you have younger people of all kinds. And there are some that are, that do have a huge amount of intellectual ambition and a whole lot of career ambition as well. And I think that you can see people who are truly vocational, and they are completely unafraid. They're completely unafraid to go into virtually any direction, much more so than we were. Okay, we were much more tentative, and we always had this sense of, okay, am I able to do this or not? But there are a bunch, some young people today who are willing to go in absolutely every direction because they feel that being able to get information today, given all the technology that we have and access to information, that really is an equalizer. That almost everyone has that, right? So you don't. That is no longer the limitation. When we were doing our starting off, being able to get a single journal article, from a particular specialized magazine was the most difficult thing.
Absolutely.
Today, that isn't the problem.
We used to mail out postcards, and then 6 weeks later to 6 months later to sometimes a year and a half later, I might get a paper and I might not get a paper.
And you treasure that paper a lot. Today, all that is readily available,
Yeah.
at the click of a button. So, yes, I think that once you make that the equalizing factor and that no longer the differentiator, then I think the younger people are able to explore in every possible direction. But there's still, because there's so much of uncertainty with career, with trying to get some kind of a stable job.
Much more so than there was in our
Much
time,
more
no?
so than before. That creates this, I do sense a sense of anxiety for most people, particularly with their career paths. What's next? Will I get a permanent position or things like that? And
Which actually brings me to the climate anxiety, also part of it, because there's so much anxiety, like you say, in today's day and age, post-COVID, but also post all the changes in the world. And since you divide your time between Spain and here, and you have dual positions, how do you feel that, well, two questions actually. One is, do you feel that there are any differences between young people in Europe and young people in India about their climate awareness and also climate anxiety? And second, as the parent of dad to two young girls, what do you think are their worries about the climate change? And it's interesting because both you and your wife are marine ecologists, but both your daughters have chosen to take completely different paths, which is very nice. So, so what do you think, looking at their friends and the people that they interact with, how aware are people about climate change and the threat of it? Or what do you think, are they seeing what's coming?
so I can speak for my daughters. And my daughters, at least the younger one, almost never reads the news. Not once. She gets all her information from a whole range of other sources, but she doesn't read the news. And it's a problem. We sometimes, we speak with her when we're traveling on our long car journeys together. And what she says is that, look, the world is such an overwhelming place right now. And I turn the news on, and pretty much everywhere in every dimension, whether it is the climate, whether it is politics, okay, whether it is things happening locally or things happening globally, whether it is to do with health, in every dimension they find absolutely no reason for optimism. And when they're thinking that they have to grow old in this kind of a world, in a world that we have left them, she says, my response to this is that I shut off. I shut down completely because I cannot deal with this level of anxiety. And so she will instead engage with music. She'll engage with dancing. She'll engage with movies, right? She'll engage with philosophy. Okay, and she says, these are the things of my immediate environment. These are things that I can engage with. I can think deeply about the present moment, about making meaning at that particular moment, but not thinking about the future to come, because the future to come doesn't seem to hold any promise at all.
And philosophy, where does she get her strength from, philosophy?
Well, she studied philosophy in school, okay, and even though she has difficulty reading, okay, she still engages with philosophy completely. She has an innate sense of philosophy. She has an innate sense of being able to unpack ideas and their philosophical merit from first principles almost. And she much prefers to have those conversations than conversations about facts or the history of the world or the condition of the world right now.
Which maybe most people is what I'm beginning to realize. I mean, the whole, why else would you have so many people polarized about things that might be obvious, so what we think of as obvious? I think people are more interested in making meaning of things than facts. How would, let's say, a young person in Spain then be different from a young person? Well, let's take an extreme case, a young person in Lakshadweep. You'd have so much more. Blanes is a small town. Lakshadweep is a version of another small town. But obviously, in terms of connections to the world, Blanes is much more connected than, say, Lakshadweep would be.
Well, yes and no. I mean, Blanes is a small town, and the people in that small town can be as provincial as people in the Lakshadweep, right? And as close to the outside world. I think that there is a force, I think, against the forces of globalization, that people are coming to realize that there's a certain human scale at which you need to live your life. And recognizing what that scale is, I think, is critical. So yes, there are all these external influences coming in terms of music, in terms of the food you eat and all the rest of it. But there is a pushback as well.
Chow mein in Lakshadweep.
That's right, yeah. So you have momos and things like that in the Lakshadweep. But at the same time, you see the children in Lakshadweep, jumping off the old boats and jumping into the sea and, catching fish and things like that. And I keep thinking that that's such an incredible way, even though it is not, we don't think of it as being embedded in nature or anything like that, or any kind of nature education. There's no one educating them, but they have an innate sense of what it is like to be in those systems. So, Blanes, where I live for half the year, once again, I think that the young people do engage with the water, with the land, in innate ways, and I don't think we're calling it nature education or anything like that. Without giving it those labels, there is that engagement, and there is. I probably don't know enough about this, but my feeling is that there is a bit of a disengagement with the larger world and its problems. Having said that, I think many things like Fridays for Future and things like that, Greta Thunberg has been an extremely important force in getting people's attention to, young people's attention to the future of the planet, and getting people to think that something must be done.
Last question for today's conversation, at least, is what would give you hope then for the future? Let's say close to 30 years of doing this. If you had another 30 years or more to do this kind of work, maybe not the diving, but the marine ecology, what would be your hope?
So I was going to go back to something you said about climate anxiety, and people are really concerned about this ecological grief, and we want to avoid ecological grief at all costs. But I actually think that grief is the most human, natural response when you witness the death of your ecosystems, when you're seeing your ecosystems decline in front of you. I think if you did not feel grief, you wouldn't be human. It is part of the process, I think, of overcoming that grief that also makes us parts of society. And I think the solutions will come from those societal re-engagements. How we get those societal re-engagements, I don't know. But I think that the process of being re-embedded in place is probably something that we need to see more and more. We need to understand that the human scale of life, where that needs, what exactly the bounds of that human scale is, and realign our lives to that human scale. I see movements like that happening in Spain. I see small little movements of circular economies, small, ideas of the commoning once again growing in places like this. And they're very small. They're all very independent. It's not part of some kind of global movement. But I think that if you have 1,000 of these blooming across the world, there I think is my sense of where optimism comes from. That there are small voices around to showing some kind of an alternative to what appears to be the dominant narrative of global capitalism, which seems to be absolutely the only possible way. But there are these little voices that are subverting that, and I think that's where I get hope from.
From the messiness of it all.
I think so. I think that we demand single solutions, magic bullets, much too much. It's not going to be like that.
So Lynn Ostrom used to have a favorite way of saying this, and she would bang on the pulpit. She said, "There are no panaceas." And I think that's what it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We need multiple solutions for every geography needs to have its own.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rohan. This
Thank
was
you.
a real pleasure to have you. And I hope we can get you back because I think we've started a number of things that we need to get back in future
We'd
conversations.
love to have these conversations. Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Harini.